Hello, my name is Dr. George Sparks, and you are watching Bible Interact TV. If you can remember that the last time we were speaking about a king, it was King David. And what's remarkable about King David is his faith. I think, however, in Christianity, we got this idea of faith as just going out and do something fantastic for God, fantastic for Jesus, and really without much preparation at all. But as we look at biblical kings and kings of great faith, we find out that God is using them and at the same time preparing them for the time in which they will be needed, and that act of faith comes forth. So act of faith does not necessarily mean like in the moment, an act that you step forward, and sometimes people get into a lot of trouble thinking they're doing an act of faith. And really, they're just, what we would say, jumping the gun, all right? However, when we look at King David, we see, for instance, that when he slew Goliath, he makes a statement that in my father's field, him being a shepherd, he says, I killed a lion and I killed a bear, and Goliath, this uncircumcised Philistine, will be the same. Understand that what David was doing out in his father's field was using his sling to defend the flock. He used the same weapon also to defeat Goliath. In that same way, we have another king, a descendant of David, whose name is King Hezekiah, that when we look at his life, he is preparing to meet the Assyrians who will lay siege to Jerusalem, a very, very powerful king of Assyria named Sennacherib. They have already laid waste to many cities in Israel up north and also in Judah down south. They now are at the gates of Jerusalem. What will King Hezekiah do? Seeing that every city that the Assyrian king went to, he has defeated. What about this act of faith? Hezekiah and the works of faith. The main account of Hezekiah's reign is found in 2 Kings chapters 18 to 20. We also find him in the book of Isaiah, chapters 36 and 39. So the prophet for Hezekiah is Isaiah, okay? So you compare the two together. When you read Hezekiah, you can also read the same time Isaiah. Also 2 Chronicles 29 to 32, and these are all in the Hebrew Bible, or what we would call our Old Testament, and Proverbs 25 and 1. 2 Kings 18 and 13. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah, and he took them. 18:17, and the king of Assyria sent a great army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. And when they arrived, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is by the highway of the washer's field. And we're not too sure where that's at, but we just know that the Assyrians are now outside the gate of Jerusalem. But if you say to me, now this is the Assyrians saying to the people on the gate of Jerusalem, and to the scribes of the king, of King Hezekiah. So the Assyrians are saying to the king, Hezekiah, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying that Judah and to Jerusalem you shall worship before the altars in Jerusalem? In other words, Hezekiah was a king of Reformation. And he knocked down all the high places where they are worshiping Baal and the Asherah. So that means the people were being forced to come to, you could say forced to come to Jerusalem and worship the one true God whose house is in Jerusalem. Chapter 18, verse 26. Then they, Hezekiah's scribes, said, please speak to your servant in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the walls. In other words, what they are saying in the Hebrew, the scribes want to, the Hebrew scribes, the scribes of Hezekiah, wanted the Assyrians to say in their native tongue, so the people on the wall of Jerusalem cannot hear the oncoming threats that the Assyrians are going to make. The Assyrians said to say to Hezekiah, "Thus say the great king, the king of Hezekiah, on what do you rest the trust of yours? What do you rest this trust of yours?" In verse 20, "Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you now trust that you have rebelled against me?" We're going to look at some cuneiform tablets. And in these young girls' hands are some scribal teaching tablets with a language called, or writing style called cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped. So when Hezekiah receives a script, a note from the Assyrians, it's more than likely going to be in a cuneiform fashion, very similar, if you will, and I'll show you a tablet later on an authentic tablet, of what these young girls are holding, okay? Chapter 18, verse 27. "But the Assyrians said to them, has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and to drink their own urine?" So the Assyrians are actually saying, this is what's going to happen. And the Assyrians were a very, as we'll see, a very extremely brutal people to those that they have defeated. Now, it mentions that this is what the people on the wall will hear. It wasn't but a few decades ago that in the old city of Jerusalem, in the Hebrew or the Jewish quarter, that an archaeologist unearthed the remaining walls that were built during the time period of Hezekiah, the extended walls around the city. And this is a picture of that extended wall through the old city. So we're actually looking at a portion of a wall that Hezekiah built to defend Jerusalem against the oncoming siege of the Assyrians, and we have proof to that in archaeology. "Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of my hands. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us, and this city will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for he says, the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come to me, or come out to me. Then each one of you will eat of his own vine, and each one of his own fig tree." Now, throughout the Old Testament and also the New Testament, when there's a time of peace and pleasure, there's a Near Eastern, you might even say euphemism, which they'll say, if it's a time of peace, you'll be eating under your own fig tree. All right? So the king of Assyria, at least his scribes, understood a lot about the Jewish people at this time. They understand about the culture and what to say. For instance, you'll be eating your own dung and drinking your own urine, or you can be under your own fig tree. It's a nice statement. The conflict between the two is a nice Jewish euphemism of that day. So it's proper. What the Bible is telling us in that script makes a lot of sense for that time period. "And do not listen to Hezekiah when he misleads you by saying, the Lord will deliver us." Remember what David would say? He said, not by strength and not by might, but by the Spirit of the Lord. And we're going to see in Hezekiah that same type of faith. It's not just about stepping out, all of a sudden doing some great action, but preparing yourself and preparing your people to meet this oncoming challenge, but also having God involved as well in your efforts and your step of faith, okay? So it isn't like, God, I'll just put it in your hands, whatever happens, it's all going to be your fault if we don't succeed. No, it's got a lot to do with us, and it's also got a lot to do with God. Hezekiah received the letters from the hand of the messengers, and he read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord. He goes into the house of the Lord Just spread it before the Lord. He's not going to hide anything. There's no buttering of any type of bread here. He lays it right before the Lord. Listen to what he says. And Hezekiah prays before the Lord and says, O God, the God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubs, you are God, you alone, of all kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear, and open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O God, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to the nations and their lands. See what he says? He doesn't try to hide it. He says what this Assyrian king says is true, is absolutely true. He has laid waste to all these other cities, but it could stop here and now, and all the world will know that there's a king and a God in Israel. It's a almost very same statement that David makes. He doesn't say that everybody will see me as being great, as everybody will see me as being powerful, but David also says that the whole world will know that there's a God of Israel. So chapters 19 and verse 18. So I'm backing up a little bit and going forward in these texts. And have cast their gods into fire, for they were not gods, but the works of men's hands, wood and stone, before they were destroyed. In other words, Hezekiah has destroyed these gods that were not gods at all. So these other nations and other cities that the Assyrians defeated, Hezekiah is simply saying that they had stone gods, they had wood gods, they had clay gods, but these were just figures made out of man's hands and not gods at all. But we're going to be different. In Jerusalem, he says, we're going to be different. So now, Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone. Now we're going to go over to the section, what we call the room of 1,000 artifacts. So join with me in the room of 1,000 artifacts, and we're going to share with you some really cool items. I promised you that I would show you a cuneiform tablet. And here's one right here, possibly dating to the 8th century, the time period of the Assyrian siege. And I know it's probably kind of dull, so I actually have a little bit of wet, moist paper here, or cloth. And if I dab it on the moist cloth, maybe you can see it. Maybe you can see it a little bit better. It's easier for me to see. I'm not sure about you on the TV. The next thing I'm going to read is evidence of an archaeological artifact was produced during the time period of King Hezekiah. Probably these were jar handles stamped by the authority of the king so that they could either deliver grain and supplies to the cities that were going to be under siege, or it was to collect taxes from the people, bring it to Jerusalem, because the majority of these types of handles, which are called lamelic handles, I'm getting ready to show you, were found around and in the vicinity of Jerusalem. They could have been used to also, once again, collect taxes and bring it to the city of Jerusalem. Lamelic, L-M-L-K, simply means king. These seals are ancient Hebrew seals stamped on the handles of large storage jars dating to the reign of King Hezekiah around 700 BC, a little bit before that as well. Discovered mostly in around Jerusalem. Several complete jars were found in situ, and that means the place of which they were found. They were not found in the archaeological shop, in situ. Buried under a destruction layer caused by Sennacherib at Lachish. While none of the original seals have been found, some 2,000 impressions made by these seals, at least 21 seal types, have been published. So I'm going to show you one right here, right now. An authentic Hezekiah. I'm going to make this one moist too, so maybe you can see it. It kind of looks like a winged bird. And you'll see an inscription on there, an imprint, and it's Lamelic, meaning belonging to the king. This dates to the 8th century, and slightly before, like the end of the 8th century. Also, we have a selection of what we call bulleyes. Bulleyes are clay impressions that were used to seal documents. So the king would have a seal, or his scribes would have a seal like on a ring. And they would take that ring and they would stamp it into the clay, and this would make a seal on, let's say, a document. And the document would be, let's say, wrapped around with a cord. On the middle of the cord, where they tie a knot, they'd place a lump of clay, and they would press their seal against it. Now, many years later, the location of, you could say, the archive where these documents were kept was burnt down. But the clay seals, because when they are exposed to great heat, became very hard, and the seals were preserved. And we have a number of seals. Not just Hezekiah, as you see in the slide, but also his father and his son, Manasseh. All right? So here we have large evidence from the kings of this period, even through Boli, the seal impressions made by possibly one of their scribes. The Ophel excavation at the foot of the southern wall of the Temple Mound, conducted by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem Institute of Archaeology under the direction of Dr. Ilat Mazar, have unearthed an impression of a royal seal of King Hezekiah, 727 to 698 BCE. So, indication of a seal, not just a jar handle, but also a seal, all right, found in situ. Here's a map of Lachish where they said that some tablets were found and also some jar handles, lamelic jars, in a distance from Jerusalem. It's not all that far, okay? It's not that far at all. So here it says the king left Lachish, took his army, and now he's encircled Jerusalem. Here is the gate of Lachish that was conquered and destroyed by the Assyrians. And also Lachish relief, which is in Nineveh. So I'm backing up a little bit to show you some of the brutality, okay, of the Assyrians, because they documented the siege of Lachish. And it was on a frieze, wall panels, that decorated the King Hezekiah's palace in Nineveh. They are now in the British Museum. The Lachish relief is a set of Assyrian stone panels narrating the story of the Assyrian victory over the kingdom of Judah during the siege of Lachish in 701 BCE. Carved between 700 and 681 BCE as a decoration of the southwest palace of Sennacherib in Nineveh. The relief is today exhibited in the British Museum in London. Here's an artist's reconstruction of the panel. You can see the wall and the people standing on the wall, the people of Judea fighting the Assyrians. The Assyrians approaching the wall with their shields, their bows and arrows, and also, if you look very carefully, we have siege machines approaching the walls as well. Here you see a close-up on, it is my right-hand side, probably your left-hand side. We see the siege machine with a, you could say, a pole ramming a tower, and those on top of the tower trying to defend it. On the left-hand side, or possibly your right-hand side, you'll see the Assyrians actually impaling those that they have captured. So a very, very brutal army. Also, another slide. It looks like they're swimming. They are not swimming. These are actually captives being filleted alive by the Assyrians. So we see them on a frieze, impaling people they captured and filleting, taking their skin off of them while they are alive. Once again, you do not want to be captured by the Assyrians. You do not want to be defeated by the Assyrians. Here is King Hezekiah saying that our God is going to save us in the face of this type of brutality. Here's a map of Hezekiah's, what we call Hezekiah's tunnel. It starts at the Gihon Spring, and it cuts through the city of David behind the wall. So what King Hezekiah did, he actually tried to, well, he did. He moved the water system so the Syrians could not have use of it or could not block it from them. And what he did is redirected it. He had his engineers redirect it underneath the city of David into its own pool, which we call today the Pool of Siloam. All right? So some people call this Hezekiah's Tunnel. You can actually go through that today if you decide you want to visit Jerusalem. Everybody goes to the Gihon Spring. I think anybody that visits Jerusalem as a tourist and goes through Hezekiah's Tunnel. The tunnel was first described in modern times around 1625, so it's been known for a while. It was later explored in 1838 by American biblical scholar Edward Robinson, and in 1865 Charles Warren, who dug another tunnel towards the Hezekiah's tunnel. So there's a, you could say, an archaeological dig that went towards and uncovered some of the extended ancient tunnel, because it once was covered in rubble and ruin as well. Okay, I think they used to call Charles Warren the mole, because he did a lot of digging. Neither identified the tunnel with Hezekiah, but in 1871, Warren suggested that the Pool of Siloam may have been dug by King Hezekiah, and in 1884, following the discovery of the Siloam inscription, wrote that the inscription thus appears to belong to a later period of the Hebrew monarchy and may very well be considered to agree with the biblical account of Hezekiah preparations of or for Sennacherib's siege. Now, the Siloam Tunnel, also known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, is a water tunnel that was dug underneath the city of David in Jerusalem in ancient times. Its popular name is due to the most common hypothesis of its origin, namely that it dates to the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah around the 8th, 7th century BCE, and corresponds to the waterworks mentioned in 2 Kings 20:20. So it's also mentioned in the Bible. All right. According to the Bible, Hezekiah prepared Jerusalem for an impending siege by the Assyrians by blocking the source of water of the upper Gihon and leading them straight down on the west side to the city of David, 2 Chronicles and 32. Here's the entrance of the Gihon Spring, and you can see part of the tunneling. This is the Siloam inscription that was found, and what that means is the Siloam inscriptions were two groups, two digging, you could say, engineer groups, were going towards each other. All right, and where they met in the middle, there was an inscription found. It was actually found by some boys, some young kids, and it was carved out. It's called the Siloam inscription. Here is the part of the wall where the Siloam inscription was dug out, okay? You can see the tunnel itself. It's not all that wide. It's really not all that tall, but I can get through it pretty easily, and I'm around 5'8". According to the Siloam inscription, the tunnel was excavated by two teams, one starting at each end of the tunnel and then meeting in the middle. The inscription is partly unreadable at present and may originally have conveyed more information than this. It is clear from the tunnel itself that several directional errors have been made during its construction. Recent scholarship has discredited the idea that the tunnel may have been formed by substantially widening a pre-existing natural crack. So there's different theories on how the tunnel was made. How the Israelite engineers have dealt with the difficult feat of making two teams digging from opposite ends meet far underground is still not fully understood. But some suggest that the two teams were directed from above by sound signals generated by hammering on the solid rock through which the tunnelers were digging. Now we have from that time period, let's take a look. We had the lamella candles, the cuneiform tablets. All right, we have the Siloam inscription, which indicates that these two groups were tunneling during the time period of Hezekiah, and that they carved this relief as a memorial to their achievement in carving this tunnel. All right. Now we also have mentioned the broad wall. The broad wall is a massive defensive structure, 7 meters thick. The unbroken length of wall uncovered by Avigad's dig runs about 71 yards long and preserved in places to a height of about 4 yards. It was long believed that the city in the period was confined to the fortified narrow hill running to the south of the Temple Mount, known as the city of David. But things have changed. Avigad's dig demonstrated that by the 8th century, the city had expanded to include the hill to the west of the Temple Mount. The motivation for building the wall was expected invasion of Judea by Sennacherib. The wall is referred to in Nehemiah 3:8, Isaiah 22:9 and 10. Here is once again a picture of the wall excavated by Avogad's team. A close-up of the wall. So here we have a number of archaeological information of the fantastic time of King Hezekiah. When he took his step of faith, understand that it was not just all of a sudden, but all this preparation went in, in preparation and in store for the arrival of the Assyrians. And the text later in the Bible tells us that the Assyrians did have to pull away, and there was possibly over 150,000 Assyrian troops laying dead in the valleys beneath Jerusalem. So, the moral of the story is, if you want to have faith, you have to prepare for your faith. If David had to do it, Hezekiah had to do that, what about you and me? Thank you for your time.
Bible Interact, uncovering the mysteries of the kingdom of God. At BibleInteract.tv, you will penetrate the scriptures of the Bible. At our store, you're just one click away from owning your favorite books, DVDs, or study guides. Earn a degree from our university and watch hundreds of video presentations from biblical scholars, archaeologists, and theologians. By subscribing to Bible Interact, you'll find all the resources you'll need, so why not subscribe today? Go to www.BibleInteract.tv. You'll be glad you did. Interested in studying more about the temple, the Messiah, or what God's plan is for our future? No problem. We've got you covered. With more than 200 DVDs, books, and workbooks, you'll find the answers you've been searching for. Bible Interact, uncovering the mysteries of the kingdom of God.